Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ya ayyuhal muslimun. To the long-time listener and first-time visitor, we welcome you to this episode. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in, wa man tamassaka bi sunnatihi ila yawmiddin. Thumma amma ba'd. Alhamdulillah ala ni'matil islami wa sunnah. All praise and thanks belong to Allah for guiding us to Islam and for guiding us to the Sunnah. As we mentioned in the last episode, inshallah ta'ala, we want to continue in this episode going over the characteristics of the hypocrite. Now, we mentioned characteristics 1 through 3. So, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, in today's class, in today's episode, we want to take characteristic number 4. But bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, what we want to do is we want to split this up into 2 different sessions, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, so that it's not too long and so that we can fully digest the information that is contained and that's going to come therein. Bithnillahi ta'ala. Na'am. It is as the poet mentions, he says, اليوم العلم وغدا مثله ومن نخبة العلم التي تلتقط يحصل المرء به حكمة وإنما السيل اجتماع النقط. That knowledge, today is knowledge and tomorrow is knowledge. Na'am. And from the fruits and the benefits that one will gain from knowledge is that an individual, by way of it, then they would gain hikmah, wisdom. Naam. And verily the sail, that flash flood, as they say, that comes inside the desert, that flash flood that comes in the desert, a stream, it is a collection of dots, of drops. Naam. So with Allah ta'ala, today we want to take a drop, and over time, drop of ilm here, a drop of ilm there, so on and so forth, it becomes a lot. نعم على كل حال. The fourth khasla الرابعة, the fourth characteristic of the hypocrites is الغدر في العهد, is that they break and they violate contracts, they violate agreements, they break their oaths. نعم. This is from the characteristics of what? Of the hypocrite, is that they break their contracts. When they make a contract, when they make an agreement, they break it and they violate its terms. This is from the ways of the hypocrites. And I want us to pay very close attention to this, because as Muslims, we have to keep our contractual agreements, whatever the clauses that are therein, as long as they do not go violate and go against the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have to honor our contracts. Now, so listen, if there's a contract presented unto you and it has clauses in it that stipulate that you violate that which Allah Ta'ala has revealed, then what is the obvious solution to that situation? Don't sign that contract. You know what I mean? Don't sign it. Very simple. Now, because we have to honor our contracts with Allah Ta'ala, except for those clauses that go against and violate the book of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, then we do not abide by that. Ala kulli hal, in any event, if there's a contract, it has in it haram, don't sign it. Naam, has in it riba, stuff like that, do not sign it. You are liable just by signing it. That's another topic, bidnillahi ta'ala, for another time. Okay? Ala kulli hal, the Shaykh, he mentions, Fadilatul Shaykh al-Allama, Shaykh Abdul Muhsin al-Abad al-Badr, hafidhullah ta'ala, he mentions, he says, وقال الله عز وجل, that Allah عز وجل, he says, وَأَوْفُوا بِالْعَهْدِ, and keep your contracts, keep your agreements, maintain and fulfill your agreements. Naam, in al-ahd kana mas'ula, because the contract, the agreement, you're going to be held responsible for it. Mas'ula. And I want you to understand this word, because the individual, the insan, those who have reached the age of maturity, those who the angels, they are writing for them, let's put it short, those who the angels are writing for them, then this person is mas'ul. Naam, this person is responsible. They are held liable. What does that mean, mas'ul? Mas'ul means that they were going to be asked about it. Naam, that they're going to be asked about it. Meaning they are responsible as such, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's going to ask them about this. Naam. Just want you to reflect on that. Let us all think about that. When we sign these contracts, these agreements, don't look at them like, oh, it's nothing, right? You could violate it, things like Allah is going to ask you about that contract. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to ask you about that contract. As a Muslim, the Muslim, we should have the greatest character. We should have the greatest morals. We should have the greatest standards. We should have the most integrity. This is because, listen, I want you to think about this. Not having integrity, this is from the characteristics of the hypocrites. So the characteristics of the believers, then they are what? The opposite is that we have integrity. Now, so I want you to look at all of these characteristics, all these 4 characteristics of the hypocrites, and realize that the believer, our characteristics are the opposite. The hypocrite, either haddatha kadhaba, when they speak they lie. The believer, either haddatha sadaqa, when they speak, they speak the truth. They're truthful. This is from the characteristics. وَقِسْ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. And then the opposite, it stands true for all of the other ones that I mentioned, is that the believer, we have the opposite of the characteristics of the hypocrite. So what we want to learn from this and take away from this is that whatever characteristic we see the hypocrite having, then we're going to do the opposite. Now, we see the hypocrite, when they take an oath, a contract, they break it. So we're going to do the opposite. We're going to keep our contracts. Allah Ta'ala tells us to keep our contracts because we're going to be asked about them. This is in Surah Al-Isra, in its verse 34. Surah Al-Isra, verse 34. And then Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, He says in Surah Al-Nahl, and this is verse 91. Allah Jalla wa Ala, He says, وَأَوْفُوا بِالْعَهْدِ اللَّهِ, and keep the covenant with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, إِذَا أَعَدْتُمْ, once you have made the covenant, have taken the covenant with Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. Meaning what? Al-Bay', when we took the Bay' of Islam, the pledge of Islam, the enter into Islam, and so on and so forth, then we have to keep that contract and we have to fulfill that to the best of our ability. Bi-idhnillahi ta'ala. Do not violate that. Allah Ta'ala, He says, وَلَا تَنْقُضُوا الْأَيْمَانَ بَعْدَ تَوْكِيدِهَا وَقَدْ جَعَلْتُمُ اللَّهَ عَلَيْكُمْ كَفِيلًا. Allah Ta'ala, He says, and do not break the oaths after you have confirmed them, and indeed you have appointed Allah as a surety. Now, we have appointed what Allah as a surety. Allah Ta'ala is the wakil. Allah Ta'ala is the kafil. Now, Allah Ta'ala, He is the kafil. So when we have taken this oath in front of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, and Allah Ta'ala is witness over it, and we take Allah Ta'ala as the witness and the guarantor of that in which we are making a contract and an oath to, so then we have to what? We have to fulfill it. This is not a joke. This is not light. We cannot take this as something that it is frivolous. That's something it is, we can just leave it in. No, we have to be very concerned with honoring our contractual agreements. Okay? And unfortunately, we live in a time that this has become something that is fleeting with a lot of the Muslims. They do not do this. They break and violate contracts all the time. They make agreements, then they go against the agreement. They make an agreement, go against the agreement. Whether it is as an employer to an employee, or whether it is the opposite, whether it is an employee to an employer. An employer has employed you to do a particular job, and then they cut corners. They don't do it properly. Now, this is a violation. This is a violation of what you have agreed on. They agreed for you to do the job in a manner in which that fits the standard that is appropriate. Now, and then you come and you cut corners and you don't do that. This is not good. This is breaking your agreement, because this is not what they have agreed to. And you know. Now, and to give you some an example of how you know is that, listen, if you have an agreement to fulfill a particular thing, and you cut corners, if you were to go to an individual and says, listen, I know we have an agreement and I'm supposed to do X, Y, and Z, but instead I have done A, B, and C. Is that okay? And you have a feeling that the answer will be no. Why would that be okay? I've hired you to do this thing. Now you're coming to me and saying you're going to do that thing. I hired you with the expectation, and our agreement is that you use this type of material. And now you're going to come to me and say you're going to use a cheaper material? That's not what we agreed on. That's not what I paid for. You didn't give me a quote for a cheaper material. You gave me a quote for this more expensive material. You have to keep your contracts, now, and you have to keep your contracts between the Muslims, undoubtedly, and also other than that. It's not as such as, oh, they're kuffar, we don't have to keep the agreement. No, you still have to keep the agreement, even if it's a non-Muslim. قال Imam Rajab, he mentions inside of Jam' Ulum al-Hikam, now, he says in explaining and giving an explanation to this particular hadith that we are talking about now. He says, وَالْغَدْرُ حَرَامٌ. He says, breaking your contractual agreements, it is haram. في كل عهد بين المسلم وغيره. In every contract between the Muslim and between the non-Muslim as well. So you made a contract. You cannot come back and say it's a non-Muslim. I don't have to abide by it. It's a non-Muslim. We cut corners. It's okay. No, it's not okay. It's not okay ever. You have to keep your contractual agreements, whether it's a Muslim or a non-Muslim. I want you to understand that. Listen, if you enter into a country, a non-Muslim country, you enter and it is expected from you certain things. From that, you're going to follow their laws. You're not going to cause chaos, corruption, this, that, and the third. So you cannot enter that country. You cannot take that agreement by accepting that visa and entry into the country. You know what's implied by that. And then you come into the country and you make mischief. You come into the country and you do things that cause harm to people. You come into the country and you do things you cause harm to the property of the people. This is what? This is al-ghadr. This is breaking of the contract. So who does things like this? The Khawarij, the terrorists, the Khawarij people. They come inside the country and they make an agreement like they're going to follow the laws and not make no harm. Then they come into the country and they do something haram. Suicide bombing, break this, break that, shoot this, kill that, so on and so forth. Breaking the covenant, breaking the contract in which they have taken by entry into that country. Because no, if you got to the border and say, listen, why you coming to the country? You coming for business, you coming for vacation, you come to study, whatever the case is. Person say, no, I want to come into the country because I'm about to blow something up in the mall. I want to come into the country because I want to kill a whole bunch of people, so on and so forth. Do you think people at immigration going to say, give you the stamp at the border, say, okay, yeah, no problem, come on in? They're going to say, no, of course not. They're going to put you right in the jail, like they should. Throw you under it, huh? Anyway, so what they do? When they speak, they lie. They playing games, they tricking, right? Yeah? All this deception, things like that. Characteristics of who? Of the hypocrites. Characteristics of the hypocrites. So don't get it confused. These Khawarij, they exhibit the characteristics of the hypocrites. They break their oath. We see it all the time. Look at the news. Look at we see it. Wa'iyadu billah. This is what's going on. This is what is real. In any event, I want you to understand, as Imam Rajbi mentions, he says, وَغَدُّ الْحَرَامِ الْغَدْرُ حَرَامٌ فِي كُلِّ عَهْدٍ بَيْنَ الْمُسْلِمِ وَغَيْرِهِ. Whether it's between a Muslim or other than a Muslim, to break the contract, it is haram. He says, وَلَوْ الْمُعَاهَدْ كَافِرًا. Even if the person who you have the contract with is a disbeliever, to break it, it is haram. That's it. But you know what? I want to let that marinate. We have to keep our contractual agreements, whether it is with a Muslim or whether it is with a non-Muslim. We have to keep our contractual agreements and fulfill the terms and clauses of our contracts. Bidillahi ta'ala, in part 2, we'll talk more about this and get deeper into this concept. But I really want that to marinate, that we have to keep our contracts and fulfill our contracts, whether it's between a Muslim or a non-Muslim. Bishallah ta'ala, benefit from some of these other things you may see over here, whatever the case is, if you're on YouTube. And for everyone else, until the next time, and for you too, also on YouTube, everyone who is listening right now, whether it's on YouTube or the podcast and the like, ila liqa, astawdi'ukum Allah, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.